So do you guys want to do the normal thing where I tell everybody what to say because I'm the brains behind this?
Hello and welcome to the 538 Politics Podcast. My name is Jody Avirgan. We are 8 days away from Election Day, and the events of the past week are forcing people to take a hard look at the state of intolerance in America. On Wednesday, a white man shot two black people at a supermarket with evidence suggesting he was motivated by race. Then on Friday, a suspect was arrested in that string of pipe bombs that was sent to a slate of people who have been critical of President Trump and then who in turn President Trump has railed against. And then on Saturday, we had a mass shooting at a synagogue in Pittsburgh, killing 11. So here we are. We'll talk about the state of toxic politics in America and the way it does and does not link to political violence. We'll also try and get a little bit of historical context with our usual crew. Here in the studio, Editor-in-Chief Nate Silver. Hello, Nate.
Hey, Jody.
Senior politics writer Claire Malone. Hello, Claire.
Hey, Jody.
And Managing Editor Micah Cohen. Hello, Micah.
Hello.
In the second half of the show, by the way, we're going to take a look at the best case scenarios for Republicans and Democrats in the Senate. We'll focus in on that now that the forecast shows kind of an all-time low for Democrats. Claire posted a piece this morning about how Democrats and Republicans are spinning their chances, so we will take a look at that. But let's begin with the events of the past week. You know, the conversation in the media has fairly quickly turned to whether toxic politics is responsible for this kind of violence and these attempts at violence that we've seen over the last week, but also sort of the last several years. So, Nate, how do we start going about evaluating the link between our politics and these kinds of actions?
I don't think we should abstractify it too much. The guy who shot all the people at the synagogue this weekend seemed to be triggered by a very specific conspiracy theory and one that's been promoted by a lot of people on the right. And that conspiracy theory is that there is Jewish influence on this migrant caravan heading up through Mexico now. And his social media postings, that's what he talked about, right? He said, I have to go in because, you know, this is too much. I have to stop this.
Yeah.
So that conspiracy, I think, was not necessarily promoted directly by President Trump, but there have been a lot of prominent Republicans who referred to it either more or less obliquely. The other guy who sent a bunch of bombs in the mail, fortunately, which were caught or were not effective, obviously also had a certain set of grievances. They seem a little bit more incoherent, frankly. But the synagogue, I don't know how you can't not talk about, like, the fact that you had literally hours after the incident happened on the Lou Dobbs show, which was on repeat, I should say, on Fox News, you had someone going on and saying there is Soros money pumping into this caravan, which is the same anti-Semitic conspiracy that this guy believed in. And Fox just didn't have the decency to they apologize for it. Even though Lou Dobbs himself has, advocated that theory in tweets and so forth. And so it's this is very specific. Don't give me any of this, don't politicize this or whatever else, right? These things that have happened are very politically motivated, and they are a symptom of certain types of discourse on the right now in American politics.
Yeah, I mean, you have someone like Mike Pence who was sent out by the White House to Mike Pence's whole thing when he was in talk radio was, I'm a conservative, but I'm not mad about it. And he literally has that sort of calm affect in the way he talks about this stuff. And he said about Trump, when the reporter asked him, does anyone ever say to him, tamp down your rhetoric when you're talking about things like this? And he says, well, everyone has their own style. And I do think that Pence line of defense of Trump is very much of a kind of the thing that we've been seeing for the past 2 years when people, once the Republican Party coalesced around Trump and Trump's kind of politics, you saw pre-coalescing a lot of people in the Republican establishment attacking Trump for his rhetoric, calling it dangerous, saying it was bad for American society. And after, May 3rd, once Trump basically became the de facto nominee, you saw people fall into line. And we've talked a lot about that, the permission structure that allows Trump to say these things without getting pushback. And I thought that Pence's remarks were quite indicative of that. We should also note that there was a gunman who killed two black people in Kentucky, and he reportedly tried to get into a black church right before the attack, and this obviously has echoes of the Mother Emanuel church shooting from a few years ago. So these extremist events obviously percolate somewhere on the internet, and they are fed by something. And the fact that we've seen this sort of rash of political violence in the past couple of weeks, and the fact that the president I mean, the president's response about, well, they should have had guns at the synagogue was quite a Trumpian, I guess, misreading, or perhaps not misreading.
It's hard to imagine. I think too often people don't reflect on historical precedents or precedents in other countries. The reaction Trump had to that shooting is something I can't imagine any of the previous 44 presidents having had, right? Just the lack of basic empathy and kind of situational awareness.
Eventually, he retreated to a more normal reaction. But yeah, at first, the first reaction is telling.
He almost reacted to it as if it were like a regular shooting in America, right? And like a secular shooting
or
in
any
America.
other controversy,
right? Because that's his thing, where he says, "Well, if they had only been armed, then we would have prevented this tragedy." Right? That was his response to the Florida, high school stuff, arming teachers. Right? That was his response, and so here he seemed to have. He was like, "Oh, there's a shooting. This is the Republican line about we need to defend ourselves," and it's like the empathy button didn't click in where it was. Americans treat their houses of worship obviously very differently. We should also note that the American Jewish community often has, they're the subject of anti-Semitic threats or graffiti, and I think oftentimes are in communication probably more than other houses of worship with police or things like that. The security comes more into mind because of the history of violence.
Well, in that history, there is some data that shows acts of anti-Semitism and anti-Semitic violence is on the rise lately. But the way I started thinking about it was this, this question of whether toxic politics and polarized politics and hate-fueled politics causes violence is complicated. Acts like this are still rare enough that they're hard to study in any kind of rigorous and systematic way. But I don't think you can look at the events, and certainly Trump and our political moment have aimed this violence in a way, in the way it played out. I mean, if you look at who the pipe bombs were sent to, they were sent to people Trump has gone after. There's kind of no making any bones about that, right? That seems clear. If you look at the synagogue shooting, the guy said he did it because of this conspiracy theory. So whether you think, people are violent, some people have mental issues, et cetera, I don't think you can brush aside the fact that at the very least, this political moment is aiming this violence at particular people and spots. And that by itself is troubling.
Can I ask a little bit about if there is a distinction between conspiracy theory and conspiratorial thinking and then kind of like heated political rhetoric? And obviously they're related, but I think we saw examples of the two happening over the weekend, and I wonder if it's worth just parsing out, like, Trump has, I think, very clearly amped up the temperature on politics in America. He has also at times fallen into specific conspiracy theories. Is it worth thinking about those two as different, and one of those as being sort of more or less linked to specific acts of violence?
I mean, I remember on the campaign trail in 2015, fairly early in the GOP primary, and then later on as well, you would have either protests that were on the fringe of being violent or, either outside these rallies or within the rallies, right, or people who were hauled off or protesters that were whatever else, right? And I remember when Trump was saying, if you kind of, I hope I'm not misremembering this too much, going from memory, but if you kind of, hit one of these guys and I'll pay the legal bills.
He absolutely
right?
said that, yeah.
I remember, being pretty shocked by that and thinking that crossed the line, and also thinking at the time that the way the media covered the story was inappropriate, right? They tried to both sides it, and it was like, well, some people were pretty riled up, right? It's like, yeah, but you can't be a candidate for president kind of condoning violence in any way. And so it's just that Trump, there's not really any line is the whole point, right? Yeah. I mean, I think sometimes there's this idea, and I think we've probably espoused it with respect to certain types of things, right? There are some times when Trump will play with the line, right? Something like, I don't know, something like tariffs out of all things, right? Where he'll do some tariffs, probably some that get him in a little bit of trouble with certain industry groups, but not into a total trade war. But with this, there's no sense of boundary or de-escalation, really. There are not many things in this whole vein of what has these violent incidents these last week or two. There are not many things that he could tweet about them that would shock me or say about them, I guess,
The other thing is, and look, I don't know this literature super well. I just spent the weekend kind of going into it. But this idea of heated rhetoric versus conspiracy theories, I think, is important. One thing the research does show is that as long as people feel like there is an outlet for their grievances in the political process, or there's something in the normal kind of scheme of things they can do, it makes the chances of violence, of political violence, less likely, right? And so the more that conspiracy theories are played up where it's like, hey, this group is acting behind the scenes to rig stuff. You know, we've heard all this rigged rhetoric from Trump. It's sort of ironic. You know, Republicans control sort of every branch of government, but there's still this feeling that they are in the minority and it's full of grievance. And I think that, combined with the feeling that stuff is rigged, these stories about shadowy people behind the scenes sort of thwarting the American will, I think all combine to at least make the conditions right.
Sorry, you said as long as there is an outlet for a sense of grievance, then the political violence would go down. But I mean, I just want to make clear here, you mean like a healthy outlet, because I think there's a lot of criticism that what we're seeing is actually a place where the most sort of toxic angels of our nature have a voice and have an outlet.
As long as people feel like there is an outlet.
Feel like it.
That's why I point out that, like, look, in many
there's
ways,
still this aggrievement.
In many ways, I worry about, look, the last real spate of political violence we saw was on the left, right? In the 1970s, where you just had Richard Nixon win this huge election. And I think maybe then it felt like, we don't have a way to change this. But what's weird now is Republicans control everything. The right controls everything. And yet there's still this feeling that the system is rigged against them. That feeling just makes me worried that people turn outside the normal means.
Yeah, and I want to return to something that Nate said where I mean, Nate, you said anything that Trump tweets or says in this general arena of the media doesn't surprise you anymore. And I agree with you that on some level it doesn't surprise us and it has become normal. I think what's being so troublingly revealed is that some people take it so seriously on social media. And, you know, the guy who sent the bombs to CNN and the prominent Democrats lived in this crazy van that had essentially like conspiracy theories literally on the windows. And I just think there's a little bit of a wake-up call right now with how the majority of the population deals with the heightened partisanship of our era and the heightened interconnectivity that we all feel through social media, which is mostly like people are upset about it, maybe angry about it, but at some point they click off and they have their real lives. But for a decent proportion of people, they take rhetoric to the next level. And, you know, you saw just before we got on, I saw that Twitter is reportedly trying to take measures and they're removing their like function as a way to, they said, you know, make the discourse more civil. Now, I have to say, weird. I find it an incredibly anemic response and a sort of almost, in my book, PR response, because what I think, like, let's take women in politics, which I know quite a bit about. I think a lot of political reporters, myself included, have had people on Twitter threaten rape or violence.
The liking isn't the problem.
The liking isn't the problem.
of the three buttons, that's the best one.
And when you report these things to Twitter, Twitter will say, well, based on the context, i.e. a political conversation, you can't read into this language too much. It's the kind of heated rhetoric that comes along with it. So to me, like, there are people who take social media in a very different way than, let's say, the majority of the population does. And then there are the anemic responses to how platforms like Twitter handle it that are flawed. And that's how you get things like, what is it, Gab, the forum where the man who shot up the synagogue, he was kind of existing, his social media experience existed on Gab, which gives greater leeway to pretty ugly speech, and that's where a lot of white nationalists find themselves. So, you know, the past couple of weeks have sort of really solidified the way that, you know, a lot of these threats that people receive over Twitter that might seem sort of bloodless can be not bloodless.
Claire showed me one of them that was just sort of like prima facie
threatening.
threatening. And that Twitter's response was like, oh, it's political speech.
Right.
Okay, let's take a quick break here, and then we will continue this conversation and get into a little bit of the history here, and we can keep talking about these themes, but we should take a quick break. And I will tell you that today's podcast is brought to you by WeWork. When WeWork was founded in 2010, the primary focus was to provide freelancers and entrepreneurs with an environment that allowed them to engage with and benefit from a network of like-minded businesses, all in a setting that encouraged innovation and collaboration. But now WeWork has taken it to another step, providing a range of solutions for medium, large, and enterprise businesses as well, such as private office space for up to 200 people and full-floor custom build-outs. These include enhanced security, privacy, and the ability to express your brand while at the same time maintaining the innovative design, flexibility, and the high level of service that companies have come to expect from WeWork. From innovation labs to trading floors, regional headquarters to global campuses, WeWork is designing, building, and operating environments that empower your people to do their best work. And when your people are at their best, your business, of course, is as well. That's why WeWork is adding 1.3 million square feet of space to its network every single month to accommodate some of the world's largest companies. These are companies like Microsoft, UBS, Adidas, and Standard Chartered Bank. Find out how WeWork can help you from small to big. Visit WeWork.com to find a location near you today. All right, we're back, and let's keep talking about this. And I'll just say one of my favorite things about this show is that we can go from a conversation about Twitter functionality and its role in our politics to maybe some more historical perspective. So let's do that, and let's talk a little bit about how to put this moment in a larger historical sweep. Micah, you started talking about this, so you want to pick that up? I mean, are you turning to history? I think a lot of us do in these kind of swirling times. We look for other moments that help us process it.
Yeah, I mean, to me, the main historical thing I try to keep in mind is that violence has always been a part of U.S. politics from the very beginning, whether it's institutional violence against minorities, or whether it's the revolution. And so in some ways that like calms me because I get real stressed out about the current moment. And on the other hand, it feels like we're sort of less equipped than ever to respond to that violence and deal with that violence. But no, look, like, you know, what I said before about the last spate of violence being kind of left-wing violence in the 70s, that glosses over a whole string of incidents between then and now. So as Galen put in our prep, you know, overall violent crime is down in the U.S. It's at a 50-year low. Right-wing extremism, though, is now 35% of U.S. terror attacks, up from 6% in 2000. The point is just that these things swing back and forth. I'd actually be curious to go back and look at how the left responded to left-wing violence in the 1970s. But certainly whether it's left-wing violence or right-wing violence, I don't think it does anybody much good to pretend that it's totally divorced from the ideological and partisan framework that it's actually taking place in. Whether it's way farther along on the scale or not, it's on the same scale and in the same direction. And so it's worth a conversation. That doesn't mean that like Mitch McConnell is responsible for these pipe bomb attacks, but it means like what can we do to sort of divorce these two and isolate the more extreme version of this?
Like, let's even step away from America for a second. And let's talk about the way that the world perceives like rebel groups fighting almost like a righteous battle, and when do they verge into terrorist groups, right? Like that's a thing that happens in, you know, look at the Taliban in Afghanistan. And at one point in U.S. history, we saw them as people who were fighting a virtuous fight, and we supplied them with arms.
Freedom fighters.
Freedom fighters. Let's look at the IRA in their initial stages, or for a couple of decades, when they were perceived as freedom fighters, and then the IRA and the Taliban slid into, in the world's perception, terrorists, right? Terrorist organizations, basically. I think that I'm saying that to sort of bring up the idea of the sliding, like politics and political violence is just in human nature intrinsically tied. I think the U.S. has thought of itself as a piece apart from that.
Exempt from that, yeah.
As exempt from that. And I keep on, you know, the past couple of years, I've thought so much about the idea of American exceptionalism that you're taught about when you're in school, that, you know, that we were this grand experiment that worked. But obviously we're human beings, and we have a lot of screwy history.
Hey, no one else is looking good either.
Brazil,
not looking too hot there. Brazil
yesterday.
Yeah, I think people are worried about the spate of violence, particularly directed at political leaders, in part because it brings back those feelings of political assassinations from the mid-century in America, where the Kennedys and Martin Luther King and Malcolm X were all killed, and that I think that makes people really uncomfortable, and it is specifically calling back to, the targeted killing of political figures is a threat to liberal democracy. And especially, I will add, if the person in charge of the country or in charge of the executive branch of the country doesn't tamp down that rhetoric or condemn those acts, that actually does throw into, I think, some question, if let's say Trump didn't condemn a political assassination in full-throated terms, that would be a problem, right? That obviously hasn't happened. But the idea that there is a possibility that someone in the office of president could lightly condone or not strongly condemn enough political violence is something that I think that is worrying and is on people's minds in seeing these acts and then Trump's sort of anemic response to these acts.
So do you guys think we look back at there's a period of assassinations and like the 70s as a period of heightened political violence in the U.S. Will we look back at this time as that?
I don't know. I mean, look, you had a man try to shoot a bunch of members of Congress at a softball practice last year, and that's not talked about that often, and that was by a apparently left-wing perpetrator against Republican, mostly victims. And so, I think it's kind of like there are so many news events that go down the memory hole. I mean, like, who's talking about Brett Kavanaugh this week?
Yeah.
I think that will have lasting effects, obviously, on the court and everything else, and probably on the midterms, although I still think we didn't totally figure out what the effect was. But I don't know. I mean, to me, it's more what it could portend later. I mean, in some ways, I'm surprised that this hasn't happened more often yet, because some people will take the president literally and not just seriously. And there are people that are predisposed toward violent tendencies, and they have easy access to assault weapons. And those kind of three things put together make for a very dangerous combination.
But so I think what you're saying though is an interesting question in terms of all of these things that we've seen, that we've witnessed over the last couple of years. Do they all still feel like glimpses of an awful thing on the horizon, or are some of them the awful thing and we are here? And I think that's, Micah, to your question, part of what's really hard to figure out. But I mean, why is someone, believing a right-wing conspiracy and walking into a synagogue and killing 11 people portending something? Maybe that is the thing.
Well, and, there are studies. I think there was one study from the Center for the Study of Hate and Extremism at California State University found a 12.5% increase in hate crimes reported by the police in the 12 largest U.S. cities. Now, there are some questions there, in you can get into issues of like how you categorize crimes and
are you in this era more on alert for calling crimes hate crimes?
Yeah,
so in some ways,
it could be a good thing.
I don't want to come. If it's only quote unquote 12% with maybe some reporting issues, I don't know, right? So that's why I say like I'm worried more about like the trajectory and the escalation and the fact that like, I don't know what effect it has ex-ante-Trump statements, but I do wonder about like if he is not condemning it in strong or consistent enough terms ex post, then if you are one of these crazy people that is prone toward violence and is prone toward taking things very literally and is on social media and frankly, but also again, it's not like you have to go to some extremely obscure web portal to hear these conspiracy theories. You can go to Fox News or Fox Business and hear them too. You can go to like major, popular, well-funded, well-advertised Republican pundits on the radio and hear them. You can sometimes hear them from members of Congress. And so it's not like you have to like travel into like the abyss of gab, or the hell it's called, right? These are on the fringe of the mainstream, and Trump, whether intentionally or not, kind of toys with that and plays with that and inserts like weird, remember the meme where he tweeted where CNN was like a wrestler and someone was like body slamming CNN, right? He's kind of like into like weird meme culture and stuff like that, and there's a lot of intermixing between, and clearly, by the way, also like clearly there's like any ability the mainstream media had to filter anything or police anything has, for many reasons, long since been lost, right? And so I don't know. I mean, it's ugh.
Yeah, that's a good way to end that statement. We got to start to move on, and I don't want to kind of like callously think about this in political terms, but we are 1 week away from an election, and so I think it's worth asking how we see this playing into the election taking place in a week and connecting back to sort of our actual politics. Any thoughts? Do we have any way to assess that?
Well, we have our models, which I don't know, Nate. If there were to be an effect, it would show up like midweek, late this week.
Yeah, and look, our model is going to be pretty conservative. I mean, if you had a bunch of generic ballot polls, it shifted.
How does the model respond to hate crimes? I mean, that's kind of like the question we're asking here, which is a pretty depressing one.
Yeah, but let's also say, like, look, the midterm elections are really important. It's the country's first major chance to say how it feels about everything that's happening. I mean, look, Trump had been at a high ebb of his approval rating recently. It's actually not clear how much that was helping Republicans. Maybe it was preventing things from getting worse. Because on a micro level, they're really having trouble in the House because there are so many Democratic districts where they have lots of money and good candidates and kind of asleep at the wheel GOP incumbents. So maybe Trump's approval rating uptick from 40% to 43% was helping hedge against that a little bit. Maybe not make things better because we don't show the GOP path getting better in the House, but preventing it from getting worse, which they have enough problems where that's something, right? Maybe helping in the Senate where the money factor doesn't help Democrats as much. I don't know. I suppose I'll put it like this. I would be curious to see Trump's approval rating in a week if it retains this recent uptick that he's had. I'm not sure that's going to affect our forecast that much. At this point, you would look more toward direct indicators of congressional preference, but I don't know. I don't think this is why Trump is he's not popular, right? I don't think this is why Trump is popular. It's not because, this is why he's unpopular.
That's why he's unpopular. Well, I think what makes it hard to sort of predict how this would affect the midterms is Trump's approval rating seemed to go up when he was out of the news. Do these stories put Trump back in the news? I think sort of.
But in a bad way.
But in
a post-Charlottesville kind of way.
But not quite as central
to the narrative. Because it's
because there were these horrific events themselves to cover, right?
Not to take away from Charlottesville, but yeah, exactly. Like Charlottesville became about Trump in this kind of unfortunate way, actually, given that a woman died and given that it was pretty strong showing of white nationalists, and it became this oddly thing all about Trump in this weird way.
Where Trump's response to this was sort of off key, but not quite Charlottesville.
Right. Oh, I disagree. I think his response to this was worse than Charlottesville.
Right, but it's not central to the narrative right now. We're 2 days out from the synagogue, and it's more the synagogue shooting, and it seems to be more about, in some ways, Gab and the platform, and it's about Trump's previous rhetoric, but not about his responses, I think.
Yeah, that's where I would go.
On the central narrative. It's obviously a part of it, like his responses to the shooting.
But Trump's response to Charlottesville became the story, while Trump's response to this feels like it is part of the story.
I put it like this. I think he inserted himself in the story in ways that he didn't need to and continued to egg things on in ways that didn't need to, whereas the Charlottesville response to me was a little bit of like the theater criticism mode where it's like, are you showing enough empathy, right? But it was like, whatever he did, I think he was going to be criticized for that. I don't think he responded in the right way. Whereas this, it was just like, this is like just the instinctual, number one, tendency to egg on things that like, all this media bashing, right? I mean, just give it a rest for a week, bro.
Yeah.
For a week or a few weeks or something, through the midterms at least, and the lack of empathy for the people who were killed at the synagogue. I mean, to me, this is like more telling in some ways.
Okay, we're going to leave it there. Obviously, an ongoing conversation. Up next, we'll switch gears a little bit, do a little more look at the model, look at the Senate map, and do a little bit more on the midterms themselves. But first, let me tell you that today's podcast is brought to you by Finn. Have you ever looked at your calendar first thing in the morning and thought, there's no way I'm getting all of this done? I did that this morning. I do that every Monday morning, basically every day. It's completely overwhelming. But that's where Finn can come in to help you as a personal assistant. You don't need to spend your time, say, recruiting, training, and managing a new assistant. Finn can do it all. Finn can schedule meetings with coworkers or clients, answer calls, handle travel plans for your business trips. Finn can find and book service providers to fix things around the office. And Finn can go out there and find new business opportunities. Finn does everything that a great assistant can without the cost and commitment of a full-time hire. And if you're someone who doesn't have 40 hours of work every week for an assistant, you only pay for what you use. Finn is available 24/7, 365 days a year, never calling in sick or taking time off. Finn can save you, say, 10 plus hours per week and help you be more productive so that you can focus on what's important, like growing your business or taking care of all those things on your calendar. And now you can try Finn for free. Just go to fin.com/politics. Once again, that's fin.com/politics to try it for free. Get yourself an assistant. fin.com/politics. We're back, and for our final segment today, let's look at the Senate map. The Democrats' odds of taking the Senate are at an all-time low. According to our forecast, their chances stand at about 1 in 6 or 17%, but there are a number of close races out there, and results all the way from Republicans picking up 4 seats to Democrats picking up 2 seats are still well within the range of possibility on our forecast. Moreover, political operatives, since we are only 8 days out, are starting to spin these various possibilities as well. As I mentioned, Claire wrote a piece this morning asking operatives on the right and the left to spin some of these closer races and different outcomes. So let's dive right into that, but then we'll also kind of spin it out and talk about where the race stands in general, the upside for Democrats and Republicans. But Claire, you did talk to some party operatives. Were there any pieces of spin that you found particularly compelling or particularly delusional?
To give people a better idea of the piece, it's basically if you exist on Twitter or talk to people who are partisans who are, working in any way in the last couple of weeks or any point during a campaign, they're always wanting to tell you why, well, the public numbers might look bad, but this is what we're seeing, and this is the best case scenario, and this is who's going to turn out, and blah, blah, blah. And I thought it could be helpful for readers to kind of see right next to each other Republican spin and Democratic spin on the Senate map, which we are currently giving Republicans a better chance to control the Senate. And so we went through a few states that we picked out to kind of showcase to readers: Indiana, Missouri, North Dakota, Florida, Arizona, Tennessee, and Texas. And I think, in some of these states where Democrats are not doing very well in the public polling, often the Democratic response or the Democratic spin is basically, this candidate is well tailored to this state. They understand how to get out the vote in the last couple of weeks, and there's good early voting out there. So those are kind of like the two. If you're not doing super well there, then I think that's kind of like a get out the vote is going to be helpful, and early voting is looking good. On the Republican side, because they're doing better, it's a little bit more race by race. But let's take somewhere like Arizona. I got a lot of from the Republican. I got a lot of talk about, well, Kristen Sinema doesn't fit well with the state, and her Oppo file is not great. Or even in states where, he thought these Democratic candidates are good, like Tennessee and Indiana, he would talk about, and I thought this was interesting, how certain states have gotten much more almost activist conservative. So no longer kind of the party elder, party statesman kind of conservative,
yeah.
But like Tea Party conservative. And I thought that was an interesting point about just the statewide environment that some of these centrist Democrats like Bredesen and Joe Donnelly have to operate in now.
Let's take one of those specific examples, just, because when someone tells you, oh, Sinema may not be a perfect fit for that state, is that something that feels like, oh, you're saying that because you're seeing how things are going? Or is that like a legit element that was maybe sort of not overlooked earlier?
So what I think the Republican meant when they said Sinema isn't a good fit for the state, they're kind of talking about her political evolution, let's call it, right? Where she was incredibly liberal during the George W. Bush administration, and since she's gotten into public office has sort of remade herself as a moderate. She's tried to work with Trump in office, and that's in part because she knew that she was going to be running in Arizona, whose electorate in general elections, I think you can say safely, would favor a more moderate candidate. So that's kind of what that's referring to. But it's in the I guess the lingua franca of a political attack ads on either side. People love to use personal stories and personal anecdotes because that's something I think that television viewers connect with and remember more than how they might have voted on like a tax bill or something 5 years ago.
But that's a good example of something I found interesting that was highlighted in this piece for me, but that you see generally, which is like the better spinners on each side. It's not like in each of these, one person is saying the sky is blue and the other person is saying the sky is red.
Right.
It's just a question of what are you emphasizing?
Right.
You know, what
same facts. I think they were both the Democrat and the Republican were extremely, fact based.
Right.
I mean, the Republicans seemed a lot more comfortable with his position, which he should be because
they're
ahead.
Win.
This is what is so tricky about covering politics is getting the facts right is hard enough, but what are you putting emphasis on? What are you spending the majority of your time talking about? What is the context you're putting it in? That's really where most of the work is done. And so what you see here is, you know, one person is talking about one thing, the other person is talking about something completely different. We run into this in our coverage, right, where we have to decide. Nate and I were talking about this the other day, is there was probably an interesting article to write about where Democratic Senate chances are improving. But if you write that article, Nate was saying this, you're sort of missing the point, which is that Republicans are doing freaking well in the Senate.
Yeah, or the reverse with Republicans in the House. I think
right.
I mean, so in some ways what Claire did here is like a hyper-transparent form of a very traditional form of political journalism, which is you talk to smart, well-connected strategists on both sides, and you try and calibrate based on that. You know, I like the fact that we just asked about every race and made sure we got a couple paragraphs in every race and didn't let them pick and choose as much. You know, if you're trying to parse for clues,
there are clues.
The Democrats seemed awfully nervous about Missouri, not very optimistic about Claire McCaskill. They seemed a little bit more equivocal on Tennessee, which is one that our model shows one of the clearer ones of the close races where we have Blackburn as a 3-1 favorite now. They both seemed like they thought that was more toss-up-y, I guess.
And so on that, is that wishful thinking, or is that?
I'm just saying, if I were making subjective, let's say I had to make subjective, I might move Tennessee closer to toss-up. I might move Missouri from toss-up into inching Republican, and I might move North Dakota from lean Republican into likely Republican.
And just to be clear, Nate does not actually do this. We don't go back into the model and change it.
But that's what a lot of people do, right? Yeah. Including people like Cook Political Report, where they kind of start out with, frankly, a fairly data-driven view. I don't think they call it that, but and then they adjust based on kind of conversations they have.
We should do this as like an ongoing.
Yeah. I thought it was
for the next 6 days.
I mean,
no, into 2020.
For sure.
And shout out to Josh Holmes and Lauren Pasalacqua for talking to me and being so transparent about it. And I was pretty upfront, which I think everyone knows this happens, which is that people call up reporters and they say, "This is why we're going to win," or "This is why the state is looking rosy."
But even in this spin, you can find clues. Like in Indiana, the Republican Holmes says, he's just like, I think it's just a tight race. Who knows?
Yeah, maybe Indiana. If we're going 2-2, right? I would say
Indiana
and Tennessee. I'd feel a little bit better about if I were Democrats. North Dakota and especially Missouri, I would feel better about if I were Republicans reading that.
Compared to where our model
is.
Yeah.
Because if you're spinning things into a toss-up, or if you're spinning things into who knows, anything can happen.
Right, and
today you had Kellyanne Conway on Fox and Friends talking about how Democrats won't pick up the 63 seats that Republicans won.
Right.
I mean, that seems as far as the House goes.
Somebody predicted that, by the way. That it was someone. I think it was Rick Klein who predicted to me that if Democrats won the House, the 63 seats that Republicans won in 2010 would be the bar, and Trump would be like, well, he didn't.
This wasn't the shellacking that it was in 2010.
But we should also point out that some of this piece and some of Cook Political, and one of the reasons why Nate will tell you maybe at this point look at the deluxe version of our model is that there is stuff I think that we, some versions of the model might be missing, just like these ineffable, super local candidate level kind of things that it makes you want to kind of see the bird's eye view of these races from both the Democratic and Republican side of things to sort of like turn over what could go wrong in the last couple of days, like what, money, like, because these people are thinking about money pouring into the states, the kind of ads, like what could come up in the next 8 days, however long it is. So I guess this is sort of pair this with your deluxe version of the Senate model. Is that right, Nate?
Yeah, I mean the deluxe, and that is the deluxe hedges. And like as we are in the final week here, we'll probably be talking about deluxe a little bit more, because that is, if you put us back to the wall and we have to like make a forecast that we think is going to be well calibrated,
that's the one.
Then deluxe hedges a little bit by incorporating.
I'd go with light personally, but
light.
As a podcast host, I'm contractually obligated to ask a question about Beto O'Rourke.
Why?
No, but through this lens, Claire, if you talk to your average Democratic member of the Democratic electorate, they will say, Beto's got this in the bag. I'm going to give him all my money. Go, go, go. If you talk to a Democratic operative, how do they view that race?
Are they on the record or off the record? I think the average Democratic base voter is very excited to see someone like Beto O'Rourke. And, I've talked to a number of people on the Democratic side in more like informal settings. And I think people are pretty realistic that Texas is a very red state. I think there is a thought that he is someone who will stick around in Democratic politics even if he doesn't win the Senate race, that people are excited mostly by, the fact that he's telegenic and good at raising money and making a good play in a red state. I think post midterms there'll maybe be like closer looks at Beto O'Rourke to see like, oh, is this guy like actually legit, whatever. But I think, Democratic operatives are realistic, smart people who look at the data and know a little bit that like this is it's important to be able to capture the enthusiasm and imagination of voters, but also, maybe we're probably not going to win this race, but like let's see where we can use this to our advantage going forward.
Yeah, the other thing is there are two types of spin, right? There's like spin that's like, hey, my candidate's going to win, and then there's spin like that you want to say things that are helpful to your candidate. Right. And in this, and in the Texas Senate, the Democrat was sort of just saying, hey, Beto's been listening to people and he's put in the work, and I think this is going to be a high turnout election. But she never says or comes anywhere particularly close to saying, I think Beto is going to win.
Right. The numbers are way off for her. Let's take half a step back here, Micah, and if you can sort of give us a sense of, we're 1 week out, 8 days out. Let's start with the Republicans. What is the best case scenario for Republicans a week from now?
It's pretty freaking good. In the Senate,
yeah.
I think the best case for Republicans is that 2018 ends up being more polarized or continues the trend of polarization, and that polling in red states, in states with lots of people without college degrees, in whiter states and more rural states, underestimates Republicans, and that they sort of run the table. Right now our model shows Republicans doing well in some of the states with Democratic incumbents. In North Dakota, Missouri is very close, but there are others. We have the Democrat in Indiana, Donnelly, as a pretty healthy favorite. We have Manchin as a clear favorite. If there's a systematic poll miss against Republicans, and let's say it underestimates their strength among non-college voters, then maybe you see Republicans come close in West Virginia and pick up Indiana, Missouri, North Dakota. Maybe they come closer, win Montana, New Jersey. The upside for Republicans in the Senate is a big upside.
Is a big upside. I was going to say that, like, one of the things that the Democratic operative said to me is like, well, and this is part of the spin, and it's true. It's like a year ago, if you're looking at the 10 states where Trump won and that had Democratic incumbents, Democrats seemed really up creek in a leaky canoe. And their point is kind of like, well, we took, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Wisconsin, and Michigan are looking good, right? Although, yes, to your point, Micah, if they turn out on election day to not be good, then that's a whole nother level of for Democrats. Is if those Midwestern blue states, which look very safe for Democrats, all of a sudden,
as Claire just said, the Senate races in Wisconsin, Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania, 2 in Minnesota. There were sort of rumblings that those could have been competitive. They don't look all that competitive.
Michigan's tightened a bit.
And so, Nate, really quickly, as we wrap, I asked about the Republican best-case scenario. What is the 30-second version of the Democratic best-case scenario a week from now?
They probably need a combination of two things. They need there to be a systematic polling error in their direction so that they win all these toss-up races, and then they need to get lucky in one of Tennessee, Texas, and North Dakota. Based on Claire's reporting, maybe Tennessee is the most likely of those. Mm-hmm. However, if the polling is way off overall because it misses Democratic turnout, then Texas does become, I know people don't want to talk about Beto, but that's the one where it's probably the hardest to poll turnout-wise.
Yeah. And again, I'll remind people that our 80% confidence interval for this runs between all the way from Democrats picking up 2 seats to Republicans actually picking up 4. So there is still a wide range of possibilities out there.
Yeah, both those upsides are not like crazy scenarios.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. It's easy to like kind of mentally shut out these kind of plausible things, right? That'll seem obvious after the fact, right? If Bredesen wins in Tennessee, it'll be like, oh, actually the polling was always pretty ambiguous there, and he was down, but there was a lot of polling post-Kavanaugh, not in the stretch run. It's a little bit like Wisconsin or something, right? And he was a good candidate. I don't know. So it's like...
So the lesson is expand your mind before the election.
The 15% chance is a real 15% chance.
Yeah.
Which is not high, but like don't round down from that 15%. And likewise for the GOP, which is also 15-20% in the House.
All right. Nate Silver, thank you as always.
Thank you.
Thanks to you, Claire Malone.
Thanks.
Thanks, Micah Cohen.
My pleasure.
Ooh, way to mix it up.
Trying to avoid this. The social fry. The vocal fry.
Social fry is a pretty
Social
good...
fry is another thing.
That's a great one.
I do have social fry.
So
yeah.
Good. My name is Jody Avigan. Galen Druk is our producer. Tony Chow is in the control room. Remember to tune in through the next week. We'll have lots more coverage leading up to the election day in this feed, and then a rough sketch of what's going to happen around the election just to get you hyped. We will have a 2-part preview on Monday and then Tuesday, election day itself, then coverage on the site all day and all night, then a late-night wrap-up podcast on Tuesday, and then some follow-up stuff on Wednesday. So start mainlining your Red Bull now, folks.
And then Thursday... And then Friday.
Thursday we nap, and then Friday we have a live show. You can get in touch by emailing us at podcasts@538.com. You can also, of course, tweet at us with any questions or comments about the show. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you soon.